Good evening or good morning, wherever you are in the world. I'm Regina Yao, and I am the founder and president of the Pixel Project. Today, I'm moderating the 11th and final YouTube session of the 10th International Women's Day edition of our Read for Pixels campaign. Through Read for Pixels, the Pixel Project is collaborating with 15 award-winning best-selling authors to raise awareness about violence against women and to raise funds for the Pixel Project to keep our efforts to end violence against women alive and kicking. We'll be telling you more about the Read for Pixels fundraiser, which has lots and lots of exclusive goodies a little later in this session. And you can find out more about the Pixel Project by visiting www.thepixelproject.net. Now, we have a very special guest with us today. We will be doing a live discussion and Q&A session with the acclaimed horror and dark fantasy author, Rae Wilde. Rae is a queer woman and author of dark fiction who has published numerous works under the pen name Rae Knowles. Her available works include The Stradivarius, Merciless Waters, I Can Fix Her, and I Do Not Apologize for My Position on Men, which is a very good title, by the way, Rae.
Thank you.
And she is represented by Carleen Geisler at PS Literary. Now, Rae has also generously donated some exclusive goodies to the stash of author treats we have up as perks for donors on the Read for Pixels Rally Up fundraising page. So the first goodie is the I Can Fix a Book and Swag bundle. So this bundle, carefully curated by Rae herself, includes one copy of I Can Fix Her. This is in paperback. Rae will sign and personalize it for you. And there will also be a postcard with a personal note from Rae and also a I Can Fix Her sticker. And the second goodie from Rae is the Merciless Waters Book and Swag bundle. So this bundle, also carefully curated by Rae, includes a copy of Merciless Waters in paperback, also signed and personalized by Rae. And I can tell you all that that's a really, really good read. If you haven't read it yet, please, if you want to donate to get the bundle, please do, or you can go get the book, I think, from most booksellers online. You can order it. And also the bundle includes a bookmark featuring the book covers of Rae's books and 2 stickers from Rae. And so important note here for everybody, these goodies are only open to donors in the US. So Rae can send it to you if you're in the US, not elsewhere. So we've raised to date $3,355 towards our $5,000 goal so far. So we're 67% of the way there. It's been, just to let everyone know, the fundraiser's been running really slowly right now, thanks to the war in Iran. So if you could all, if you have anything to spare to donate to us, please do give generously before the fundraiser ends on the 15th of April 2026. All funds go towards our work to help end violence against women. And we are 100% volunteer staffed. So all the funds that we raise go towards the expenses of campaigns such as Read for Pixels. And also, if you are watching this session on YouTube right now, you will be able to ask Rae questions live. Just to make sure you're logged into your YouTube account so that you can type your questions into the chat box to the right of this YouTube screen, and Xiao Chin, who is today's producer and chat box moderator, will relay them to me to read out to Rae to answer. So now over to Rae. Welcome to Read for Pixels, Rae. What will you be reading for us today?
So thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to do this reading today. I have never read from it before, and it's a brand new story that will be part of the re-release of my collection called I Do Not Apologize for My Position on Men. That's being re-released from Shortwave Publishing on July 21st of this year. And the story is called Marrying a Mermaid. Should I go ahead and get into it then?
Yes, go ahead, Rae.
All right. You're going to see me looking just off center. That's at my other screen. This portion is called The Honeymoon. Literature on the assimilation of mermaids into the human world suggests a single setting for the transition period. I carried my wife over the threshold. In fact, I carried her from the car, up the stairs, over the threshold, and into the main bathroom. Money I might have spent on flights to Cancun was instead allocated to the purchase and installation of a jacuzzi tub in the shape of a heart, 2 seats with headrests, underwater lighting, built-in speakers, and the option of bubbles. I spent less on my first car. As we waited for the tub to fill, I strung her wedding ring, a simple gold band, on a simple gold chain and fastened it around her neck. She held it up, eyelids raising wide to expose the full length of the vertical slits of her pupils. And it was then I noticed her irises were not truly gold. Compared to the gold band, they held more of a greenish hue. My wife made a cawing sound and swatted at my left arm, which I offered to her. Her gaze trailed from shoulder to elbow to hand, coming to rest on my ring finger, on my own wedding band. She spun in the tub, holding up her arm to match mine, then grasped the ring around her necklace and tried to slide it over her finger to wear in a similar fashion. "No, stop," I said as it snagged on her webbing. Vibrations rang through her throat and she pushed the band again. I closed my hand over hers. "Not yet, but soon." Table salt melted into the warm bath. My bride leaned back against the headrest. She flicked her tail, sending a wave over the rim of the tub. It took both of my extra towels to mop it up, and refilling the spillage pushed the water heater past its limit. In the evening, the basin was full, but the water was cold. Grains of salt collected around the jets in the bottom of the tub undissolved. I reread the same internet forum I'd read 30 times. Scales will begin to fall off within the first couple of days. The transition period varies from mermaid to mermaid, but legs should emerge within 2 to 4 weeks and be functional within 6 to 8 weeks. If your mermaid experiences excessive bleeding or there is mold growth around the unshed scales, consult a bioveterinary specialist. I rolled the idea of excessive bleeding over in my thoughts, wondering how much bleeding could be considered normal. A trickle? A stream? Would it stain the water, and would I know by the shade of the stain whether her blood loss was excessive? She fell asleep first, in the way that mermaids do, which is to say suddenly and all at once. Standing over her in the darkened bathroom, I watched as silver bubbles crept from the narrow slits of her nose, one by one, and less, until the final slip of air popped at the surface. Salt gathered in a shallow drift beneath her head, and I hoped it felt a bit like a sandy pillow, a bit like home. After waking confused on the cold tile of the bathroom floor, I dragged myself to bed. With a pang of guilt, I slid between the sheets, and I thought about calling my mother, wanting to ask whether it was cruel to lie in bed while my wife, folded at the middle to fit, slept in tepid bath water. I went as far as bringing up her contact in my phone, looking at the saved picture of us where she was dressed in hot pink and her hair was all silver and the cataracts hadn't yet claimed the light in her bright blue eyes. But it was late by then, and it had been 4 years since we buried her. In the morning, I used a net from the pet store to gather shed hair and scales. It is best to maintain the water as long as possible, rather than drain and refill, as this causes minimal changes in salinity. Clear debris using a clean net, ensure pH is within a range of 8.1 to 8.3. Check remaining scales for mold growth daily. Aluminum cans filled 4 pantry shelves. They sagged in the center. Wire racks and drywall anchors, they were never meant to hold this much weight, built with cereal and microwave dinners and ramen noodle soups in mind. Sardines opened with a violent slice and a sound like a kiss. I arranged them long ways on a porcelain plate, tried to cut a flower on the side as a garnish, but the petals slipped into the oily ooze, and I tossed the blossom in the trash on the way out of the kitchen. She had cut her webbing with nail scissors. I realized it in chunks, seeing first the delicate silver shears sprawled open on the bathroom floor, then the drops of blood, thinned to a streaky blush on the bathtub side, then the gold band, still threaded through its chain, resting at the base of her freshly snipped fingers. Her grin split wide and angular, pointed teeth in the curve of her mouth, each the shape of a scythe. The rolling, clicking noise she made caused a tug in the depth of my belly, and I set the plate on the vanity, pressed my hands to my thighs, and took a deep breath that tasted of fish and iron to stop myself from crying. She ate the sardines without chewing. Great slurps and a visible expansion of her throat, and the shiny fish were swallowed, eyes and bones and all. I left. I told my bride I needed breakfast, but in truth, I called my brother. I told him everything about the scales, the hair, the scissors, and the sardines. We talked for 20 minutes, which was a very long time for me and my brother, and I said all that I could, except I'm afraid. I think I made a mistake. I have a college buddy who married one, he said. I could give him your number. The college buddy had a name, and the name was John without an H, and the college buddy was very specific about that. Though he called me, he answered sheepishly as if he hadn't expected anyone at the moment. I said, I married a mermaid, and I heard, but John without an H, my brother's college buddy, cut me off and said, listen, I called just to tell you I don't like to talk about it. I'm sorry and good luck. It was the I'm sorry that stuck. My brother wouldn't have told him much, I didn't think, but maybe he had. I reasoned one way, then the other. Had he meant, I'm sorry for what's happening, or I'm sorry for what's about to happen? Doubt and possibility. I bobbed between the two until I couldn't stand the uncertainty of it, and I called John without an H back, but he let me go to voicemail. And that's all for that section.
Thank you so much, Rae. That is a really intriguing story. So we hope if anyone hasn't bought that book yet, go get the book. Go get that book once it's out. It's coming out soon, right? In this summer?
Yes, so that story will be part of I Do Not Apologize for My Position on Men, which is a collection of my short fiction, and it comes out July 21st, but you can pre-order it now. Pre-orders should be at all the major retailers.
Yeah. So let's begin today's discussion. So all your books and stories feature memorable female narrators, protagonists, and supporting characters, ranging from Johnny and Alice in I Can Fix Her to Jack and Lily in Merciless Waters. I hope I pronounced their names correctly. So who or what inspired you to create your female characters?
Yeah, I love quote unquote unlikable female characters, especially when they're the main character. They're the most interesting to me. Like one really notable one is Amy Dunn in Gone Girl. Amy Dunn, sorry. I just find them so compelling, more so than I do kind of the stereotypical female characters that we often get in commercial media and fiction. And I do think that media and fiction is kind of moving away from that now. We're getting more nuanced and layered female characters. But that's really what I'm interested in. And in many of my books, I have decentered men from the narratives almost entirely. So in both I Can Fix Her and Merciless Waters, we're following a sapphic couple. That's true in many of my other books as well. And what I like to show in those stories is how a patriarchal influence permeates even relationships between two women, and how it's sort of inescapable and causes toxicity to us all, even when there's not an obvious evil male character thrown into the mix.
Yeah, I mean, you say you like to write unlikable female characters. I mean, by mainstream standards, right? But do you ever feel pressured by cultural expectations or gendered expectations to make your female characters relatable and likable?
I think yes, in the sense that there is a much larger readership for likable women. So, and to me specifically, that means women who aren't selfish. Selfishness in a female character, I found, is almost an unforgivable sin. Women who would choose themselves over the well-being of another character in a story. So I think I have felt that, not from my readers at all, but I think when I think about, writing books that I hope would be a more commercial success and be more financially viable, I think that would probably be the case if the women were more quote unquote likable.
Yeah, I mean it's funny because we've asked this question of many other authors, and including female authors, and we get the general response we get is yes, they do feel the pressure, and then some of them even get pushback from fans. So if they are popular, and I think there's one author who said that when she was doing a book signing, she just got told off by some of her fans for writing an unlikable character, and that was pretty unpleasant. So that's why it's interesting to hear that you like writing unlikable female characters, but sometimes I wonder if unlikable is actually a shorthand for compelling, because it's a lot it's a lot more compelling to read about complex women, and women are people, right? And so we're not necessarily likable all the time. It's the same with anyone of any gender. You can't be likable all the time. Everyone has their bad sides and good sides. So I wonder if this is just mainstream publishing flattening, and the genre flattening women in fiction. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it can be. I think I obviously find difficult, complex, nuanced, layered, challenging characters in general to be far more compelling. I don't know broadly if everyone feels that way. But again, I think there are still certain lines that you can't cross without pushback.
Mhm.
For example, I have one short story that I wrote like forever ago, but it's popping into my mind, where one of the female characters doesn't harm, but endangers a child. And even just writing that felt really edgy and like dicey. Like I wasn't sure what the response to that would be. And I didn't get any like criticism personally about that or anything, but I did see readers respond to this character incredibly negatively. And I don't think they're necessarily wrong, right? Like the character is not great, but I do think there are certain societal expectations that even people who consider themselves pretty liberally minded, when it comes to fiction, when a female character crosses those lines, they don't like that, right? That's still pretty uncomfortable.
Yeah, which is interesting because I think there's a book out by a horror author named Virginia Fato, and it's called Victorian Psycho, and it pushes it all. It's a really violent Victorian nanny, and it turns all the stereotypes and all on their head, and it pushes. It's very bloody and it's very visceral, but they are now doing I think they're doing a TV adaptation of that. So I thought that was interesting because what you just said, yes, it's true. There are a lot of that, not a lot, but there are some lines that people don't generally don't cross, but that book crosses it all and is celebrated. So it's interesting. So speaking about lines, so it seems that horror as a genre in both modern and folk storytelling has traditionally not been kind to female figures and characters, especially in terms of female stereotypes and tropes. Women are portrayed as everything from murderers like Lizzie Borden and Dracula's handmaidens to victims, and countless horror movies can attest to that. How do you work around or subvert these stereotypes? Because you mentioned a bit about that before, to create a female character to have agency in dealing with the world and horrors around them, including situations that involve sexism, misogyny, and violence against women.
Yeah, so I totally get and agree with what you're saying, where I think even when women are villains in horror, often, they're not the brilliant, charming Hannibal Lecter. They're not the super intimidating Jason. They always take on this sort of, or they tend to take on a sort of like shameful role. Like the witch has sort of a cowardliness to it. There's not the heroics that are around like a male slasher villain, for example. So I think like the female villains we see, or I've seen traditionally, because it is starting to change, are not ones that get a cult following for that reason. And on the other side, the female victims, probably most famously in like a slasher, tend to be super one-dimensional, overly sexualized. They are often judged on screen or on page for something like promiscuity, and judged through violence. So yeah, I agree that traditionally women have gotten a pretty raw deal in horror. That said, I think horror is really in a golden age right now, and the people putting it out are from more diverse backgrounds. So we are starting to see that shift, which is really exciting. In terms of how I write character, I think I'm going to say writing is always difficult, but the part of it that is difficult for me is not writing nuanced female characters, women and non-binary characters as well, simply because like I'm just not interested in men's character arcs and stories. So I am almost never tempted to center a man in my work. That's not something that I have to push back against and like remind myself to like, but flesh out the female characters too. I'm sort of on the other end of that spectrum, where sometimes I have to remind myself that like, okay, men aren't quite this one-dimensional, Rae, like give them, make them a real person. So I wouldn't say that that's something that I need to like be cognizant of in terms of, making sure that my female and non-binary characters are fleshed out and complex. I think it's kind of the opposite, because I'm endlessly fascinated with women, with unusual psychology, with relationships, with toxic relationships. I find all that really, really interesting, and I love to explore that from different angles.
Yeah. Well, speaking of relationships, in your books, relationships between women, whether romantic or friendship based or as allies, are always one of the key components of the story. So, what are the challenges, if there are any, of writing about female friendships, allyships, and sisterhood in horror? And do you think, why do you think positive takes on female friendship, allyship, and sisterhood is still not very common in the genre?
I hear this a lot on TikTok, and I don't disagree, where unfortunately the public at large has not embraced sapphic stories or like stories about female friendship, obviously, as much as they have heterosexual, content around heterosexual relationships, but not nearly even as much as like books and media about relationships between two men. I think we're starting to see, like with Heated Rivalry, instantly became super viral, and it was great. I watched it, loved every minute of it. But I think there is a challenge that the public in a broad way has not embraced these stories. So the trickle down effect of that is, publishing acquires less of them. I'm sure, I don't know specifically, but I imagine that would also impact how much TV and movie studios were making those kind of pieces. And I think that's really a shame, because I personally, again, like, nothing will get me disinterested in a thing faster than if it's about a man's personal journey. In fact, when people recommend books or movies or TV shows to me, I'll ask them outright, is this about a man's personal journey? And you'd be surprised, if you frame it that way, how high the percentage is of things that are, at the end of the day, just about a man's personal journey. And that's not something I'm interested in. So I hope that, interest grows in these kinds of stories. I think there's a lot to say. And I think we need, a new Bechdel test, right? It's not enough for me personally for a piece of content to have one scene where two women discuss something other than a man. Like, I think we can do a lot better than that being the bar. So, I hope we move that way, because I really think something that I've tried to prove in my work, and many other authors are proving all the time, is that you can write a fully fleshed out, very compelling narrative that has little or nothing to do with a man or his personal journey.
Yeah, I mean, personally, for my personal, over the years, I actually, except for a handful of male authors, I stopped reading books by men. I basically now read mostly women. So, female authors. And to me, they flesh out characters of any gender better than a lot of male authors. The whole thing, the hashtag about men writing women. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
No, yeah, that's actually accurate to a degree.
Yeah, it's unfortunately often true. And like, it makes me think about The Exorcist, which I read, I don't know, maybe about a year ago now. And it's such a shame, because most of the book is like brilliant. It's so great. But then every section about the mother is so ridiculous in its portrayal of a woman that it like taints the entire experience of reading the book. Because it's like, did no one tell you that, like, have you ever talked to a woman? Like, it's almost bizarre at times that, like, you can watch in authors' writing quality just drop through the floor the second they try to write a woman. And it's odd and sad in a way, but it's many times true.
Oh, the audience agrees with you. Blatty's big
Yeah.
weakness. And someone else said, we definitely need more non-men perspectives. Definitely.
Yeah.
And more voices are coming out now in publishing. Yeah, and that's great. So you mentioned relationships. So what can sapphic relationships between female characters in your books and stories teach mainstream horror and speculative fiction in general about writing complex romantic relationships that are equitable, supportive, and relatable?
So let me just get out there that I don't write the good gays. I think it's so important that we have positive representation of relationships across the LGBTQ plus community in our movies, TV, books, all of it. That's so important to have out there. It's not what I'm doing. So I just want to be really upfront about that. Being really interested in toxic relationships, a lot of my work includes an unhealthy relationship, often between two women. And because I'm not interested in men, right? I don't want to write about them. So I have these two women, but I am interested in toxic relationships. And I'm also really interested in how patriarchal ideas and norms can influence even a romantic relationship between two women, right? Because we all live under patriarchy. We are influenced by it in ways that we see and ways that we don't see. We can try to unlearn it, but people will be at different stages of that. So I think it's really interesting to explore how those patriarchal dynamics can be adopted in sapphic relationships and play out in really toxic ways.
Basically, the patriarchy poisons a lot of our relationships. It doesn't matter between which genders, right? We're just swimming in the stew.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, everyone, we are coming up to midway through this session. I'm chatting with Rae Wilde today. So, if you have any questions for Rae, now's the time to ask your questions. You can type them into the chat box to the right of the screen, and Xiao Chin, who's today's producer, will relay them to me to put them up on screen for Rae to answer. So now's your chance. Everybody, get your questions in. So let's continue talking. I know you don't like to you decenter men from your books and stories, but let's talk about the male characters in your books, because even though you do that, your male characters are still they're so toxic that it kind of like burned in my brain. I mean, partly because I do the work that the Pixel Project does, and every day we come across reports and stories and cases involving men like this. So let's talk about the male characters in your book, such as May's husband Carter in The Stradivarius and Reginald, the male interloper in Merciless Waters, as well as across the horror genre. So many of the male characters in your books are definitely prime practitioners of toxic masculinity who bring violence and disruption into the lives of the women they come into contact with. However, they are also complex characters that are an integral part of the story. Do you think reframing how stories describe men away from hostile and toxic stereotypes and towards complexity and even vulnerability can be one of the ways that horror authors can break away from unhealthy tropes that promote toxic masculinity and the dehumanization of women?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a greater representation of men who exercise a version of masculinity, and I would even just say a version of humanity that is not reflective of the manosphere, right wing, incel, hyper patriarchal stuff that we get all too often. I think it's incredibly important. I have a son, and as he grows up, I want him to see men that he can look up to and admire, and not for things like being the most badass, driving the fastest car, getting all the hot women. Like, we need heroes for boys, right? That aren't achieving their heroicism by stepping on the women and other less privileged people around them, or through just acts of violence. I think that's incredibly important. I did finally write a good man. No one has seen it yet because the book is being shopped around to editors right now by my agent. But because I had such a long history of writing these ultra toxic versions of men in my book as the antagonists, my writing mentor very wisely said to me, like, I think it'd be really great if you practiced writing a different kind of man, like to grow your skill set. And I think he was absolutely right about that, in the same way that, we joke about male authors writing women like breasting boobily through the house. Like I also don't want to be writing shallow representations of men. So I did finally, write a what I would call a morally good man in a work, and that was a real growing experience for me. But yeah, that was a really, really long way to answer your question. That yes, I absolutely think that representation is vitally important, and I think I would task the male authors out there with this being a huge priority.
Okay. Do you hear that, male authors? Yes.
Call it you in.
Yeah. So there are some comments from the audience. So RMA 9B, we need to examine the nuance of patriarchal effects on non-cishet relationships. I agree. And thank you for sharing your thoughts. And someone has a question. So CS Humble 06 says, can you give us some great examples of recent works of books or film or television that most clearly reveal patriarchy and the pain it manifests in the world?
Yeah, absolutely. So either fortunately or unfortunately for me, I watch probably more of this kind of content than I even should. Most recently, what comes to mind is I did a rewatch of a mini series called Adolescence that follows an adolescent boy in the UK from his arrest for the murder of a classmate, a female classmate, through up to the point of him accepting a plea. And this mini series, or limited series rather, really zooms in on the impact on, the other kids he went to school with, his family, the therapist who evaluates him, really all of the people in his sphere who each in their own way grapples with how could something like this happen. And it was a story of him being radicalized by red pill incel communities online. And I think those stories are really important. I think the ways in which men and boys are influenced have evolved considerably. Like, not to age myself too much, but like, we didn't have the internet like this when I was that age. Like, we had some internet, we didn't have as much internet. And I think what we think of as safe as parents, right? Your kid being home in your house, that should be safe. Unfortunately, it's not anymore. There are all kinds of channels, some more innocuous than others, or seemingly innocuous than others, that can influence the minds of, young men as they grow. And once the seeds are there of this super patriarchal, domineering, deeply rooted in shame, misogyny, it's very difficult to turn. There's numerous scientific studies that show it's way simpler for someone to learn something the first time than it is for them to unlearn something else and, learn a new way. So I think Adolescence, I would highly recommend, especially for parents, as just a really crystallized example of how patriarchy influences and shapes the world and destroys not just women's lives, but the lives of men and boys too.
Yeah. So that brings me to a question. I mean, you are a parent yourself, and what would you've made some very thoughtful observations about Adolescence, the series. But what would you recommend as a parent yourself? Do you have any recommendations to other parents about how to get boys more involved in helping to stop violence against women and girls?
Oh, I wish I had all the answers. um, I think talking, right? I mean, and that's not a revolutionary thing to say, but I think the power of communication can't be understated. Communicating about difficult topics in ways that are age appropriate, making sure there's that open door of communication, depending again on age, certain levels of accountability, right? You don't want to give an 8-year-old unfettered access to the internet where nobody's watching, right? So, that's what I try to do, and I hope that I do enough, right? Like any parent, I hope that I'm doing the right things. I'm not doing too much that my kiddo feels like he can talk to me, that I've, given him enough information to make educated choices. I think what we don't want to do is just wall ourselves off and like just kind of cross our fingers and like hope it goes great for them in school and on the internet on their own. I think that's not what we want to do. But I'll tell you what, I wish like hell I had a surefire way to make sure that, my son grows into the kind of man that I would be proud of, a man with feminist values and values of equality and integrity and humanity.
Yeah, it is tough. You never know, right? Because of the access to the internet, and now more and more countries. Have you read that? I think more and more countries are starting to put age limits as to what's the youngest age someone could be to access social media right now.
Sure.
Yeah. I think, is it Indonesia? I think Malaysia is going to do it as well. And I think Australia is starting to do that. Like you can't access the internet unless you're above a certain age.
Interesting.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see how those policies, government policies, play out. Stopping, with curbing the influence of the manosphere. So let's go back to talking about horror as a genre. So horror can be seen as a genre that reflects and addresses the deeper spheres of culture and society. For example, much has been made about how zombie movies are social commentary on everything from consumerism to politics. We could say that this genre also reflects the deep-seated misogyny and sexism of the patriarchy, because horror stories commonly feature some sort of violence against women that involves violating women's boundaries and consent. Now, rape, incest, domestic violence, and other forms of violence against women are very common in horror. And like I said, the violation of a woman's boundaries can be said to be a convenient device for inducing and heightening feelings of dread and terror in the reader or viewer. Do you think consent is an issue that writers in the horror genre have started tackling successfully in recent years? And what can horror writers do to include consent in their stories?
I think there is a great section of horror writers who are very conscientious about this, and make sure that content like rape and sexual assault is clearly marked and like a trigger warning, that it's done with the gravitas that it deserves and without gratuitous detail for the purpose of titillation. Titillation, I think, is a key word that I want to come back to, because as an audience member in a movie, as a reader taking in a book, I'll speak for myself. I am not stupid. I know when a rape or sexual assault that is being portrayed is intended to titillate male viewers. And I take issue with that. It's not to say nobody can write this or only certain people can write this, but it is to say that like it does not go unnoticed when this happens. And I think it happens more in some subgenres than others. That's one of the reasons I personally don't read very much extreme horror. And when I do, it's by female authors, is I've had frequently the experience of reading a portrayal of sexual assault or rape in an extreme horror book by a male author and getting the feeling that this is not a fiction narrative as much as this is like your own fantasy that's playing out on the page. And I want to caveat that, like, you can run totally in the wrong direction with what I just said and try to find that everywhere and suss out which horror authors are actually like sickos and evil because they put this in their book. And I want to be clear that I do not believe in that at all. Very specifically in the extreme horror genre, there have been a few examples where it feels like rape and sexual assault was written in a way that was almost masturbatory. And I do find that offensive. As a woman, as a survivor of sexual assault, as a human, like, I think that's just kind of a gross thing to do. So I will say, I think there are sections of the horror community that are doing really well with this. And there are sections that have some room to grow.
That is true of all genres, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it's just me, but I love horror, right? And I find that a really good ghost story, haunted house story, is in some ways more difficult to write than some of this extreme horror because it feels like the author has to be a lot more masterful about characterization, about creating atmosphere, and writing things in such a way that you're looking over your shoulder even in broad daylight. And I've read across the spectrum of horror, including extreme horror that you've mentioned. And it's never the extreme horror that gets me looking over my shoulder. And I think horror is there to scare us. And if you're not that scared, but you're just disgusted, it's not really horror anymore, right?
Yeah, and I'm totally on the same page with you. But I do want to take this opportunity to shout out to non-men horror authors that are incredible. Paula D. Ashe wrote an extreme horror collection called We Are Here to Hurt Each Other. And it is brilliant. Because Regina, I totally get what you're saying. And I do agree with you that I often, extreme horror books are written with a, let's say, lower level of technical precision. That is not the case for Paula D. Ashe. She is a total badass. She is totally brilliant. And please check out We Are Here to Hurt Each Other if you're looking for extreme horror that is well written by a non-man killer. The other one I'll say is Emma E. Murray. She has several books out. She has one called Shoot Me in the Face on a Beautiful Day. She has lots of books with various publishers, but again, what you're getting at, the more elevated prose, more atmospheric. It's not just what's the grossest thing I can think of and let me put it on the page.
Yeah. So, stories, we're talking about stories, right? And stories are one of the most powerful ways of bringing about cultural change. In fact, before humanity even had a system for writing, we were passing down our culture. We were all passing down traditions and all through oral stories, right? People tell each other stories. So let's talk about writing horror stories within the context of violence against women. What are the techniques that horror authors can use to diffuse and turn toxic tropes of violence against women on its head if the story calls for the inclusion of, say, rape or domestic violence?
So let me think about how to answer this. I have included both domestic violence and sexual assault in more than one of my books. I will not speak from a position of authority here because I think it's not up to me to decide whether or not I have executed these things in the right way and whether or not I should be giving other people advice on how to do it. But I will talk about what I consider when I'm writing this kind of material. And that is, I try to get very clear about my goal. And my goal is to let the reader know what has happened because it is important backstory to whatever is happening now, or it is an important pivot in the plot, etc., letting them know what has happened, convey the feeling of the thing, and then move on. That's how I personally handle this. I do not want to spend a lot of time. I don't want to put my readers through 20 pages of graphic descriptions of assault of any kind, especially against a woman. I find those depictions to be uncomfortable and not in a way that is compelling to me, if that makes sense. I tend to want those things to end. So I take that approach with how I write that subject matter. Kind of less is more, right? Like we get an idea of what happened, we understand how it felt for the character, and we're moving on with our story.
Yeah. So we have come to the final two questions today. And if anyone in the audience has any other questions for Rae, now's your final chance to get in a question, because I think we have time for just one more audience question as well. So Rae, you have been so incredibly supportive of our Read for Pixels campaign and our anti-violence against women work as a whole. Now, why do you support the cause to end violence against women?
The gendered violence, patriarchy, misogyny is the cause for me. It just tugs at my heart in a way that nothing else really does. You know, I've mentioned that I write a lot of this in terms of theme. I consume a lot of this content in my free time. To me, it is one of the social issues that I think has not had the time it deserves, sort of on a world stage, on, you know, in terms of it being freely discussed and widely understood in terms of the prevalence of violence against women, the systemic harms and systemic violence that happens against women. For example, women not being included in medical studies for, you know, most of our scientific history, medications not being tested on women. I mean, that's violence. That's violence against women. And I think most people don't even know that those things are true, that crash test dummies are male bodies, so women are more likely to be injured in a crash because airbags are modeled to protect male bodies, not female bodies. I hope that within my lifetime, we, you know, as a society, our culture is ready to have the conversation about violence against women. I think, unfortunately, right now, many people kind of think like, you know, what are you feminists talking about? Like, what rights don't you have? And I think they really believe that. There's this huge level of ignorance about how women are impacted by patriarchy. And I'm going to say there's an even higher level of ignorance around how men are harmed by patriarchy. Most often, you know, it's men upholding our patriarchal systems, enacting violence against women, both interpersonally and in systemic ways. But there's also a hell of a lot of women that are riding really hard for misogyny and patriarchy. And I think we just need a real reckoning with how this hurts women, how this hurts men, how this hurts people of all genders. It's just bad. It's all bad. And I really hope that it becomes a more prevalent conversation in the cultural zeitgeist and that we can make some forward movement on this, though it does sadly seem that, at least right now in the US, we're moving in the wrong direction.
Yeah, and when you talked about medical misogyny, it's only very recently that obstetric violence has been recognized as a form of violence against women. There's a groundbreaking case, I think, in one of the can't remember which country, and it was ruled that the woman had experienced obstetric violence and reparations have to be made, and more advocates are speaking up about the level of violence that goes on in delivery rooms, in hospitals, in clinics. So, people are just cottoning on to the fact that, yeah, birth is traumatic, partly because of the way pregnant women and pregnant people are treated in the delivery room. So, final question here of the day. In your opinion, how can authors like yourself best support efforts to kick off social change to end violence against women?
I think the thing we're most suited to do is to tell stories about this. Stories resonate with people. Stories to me are everything, right? Whether it's a story I'm telling you person to person, it's a book, it's a TV show, it's a movie. I think there is nothing better positioned to increase human empathy than diverse storytelling. So I think as authors, we need to do what we're best at and tell stories that incorporate these themes and these messages that are important to us. It doesn't mean the book needs to read like a PSA where we're, wagging our finger in the faces of the reader, trying to teach them a lesson. But I think most messages about empathy are ultimately received through storytelling. So I think that is the number one. And then I think, of course, doing things like this event, showing up to charity conferences, speaking, donating time, donating books, whatever resources are available to go towards a great cause. Of course, those are always wonderful and welcome as well.
So we've come to the end of the discussion session. Thank you for being with us today, Rae, and everyone, thank you for being with us today. But before we go, we would like to let everyone know, if you joined us a little later in the session, we mentioned earlier that Rae has generously donated some exclusive goodies to the stash of author perks we have up as treats or donors on the Read for Pixels Rally Up fundraising page. The first goodie is Rae's I Can Fix Her book and swag bundle. I mean, we talked about these books during this session. So if you're curious, this is a great way to get a hold of a copy of it. So this bundle, carefully put together by Rae herself, includes one I Can Fix Her paperback that Rae's going to sign and personalize for you. It will also include a postcard with a personal note from Rae. And it'll include one I Can Fix Her sticker to go with the book. And the second goodie is the Merciless Waters book and swag bundle. And I'm going to just stump it up. I'm going to just say again, if you have not read Merciless Waters, please read it. It's got a really cool book cover as well.
Oh, yes. The artist is Daniela Batsheva, by the way. I shout her out every possible chance I get with all this AI stuff happening. But she knocked it out of the park with this cover. It's gorgeous.
Yeah. And the Merciless Waters bundle includes one paperback of Merciless Waters signed and personalized by Rae for you, and a bookmark featuring the book covers of Rae's books. And Rae's books have really cool book covers. And there'll be 2 stickers as well from Rae. And just to let you all know, these goodies are open to donors in the US only. So if you're in the US, go ahead and check it out. But if you are somewhere else in the world, there are also plenty of goodies available for authors and publishers, including Charlene Harris, Carrie Vaughn, Dorothy Coomson, Genevieve Flynn, JC Cervantes, Karen Auden, Kelsia Yu, Christy Parkowski, Al Penelope, Laurie R. King, Liba Bray, Linda D. Edison, Subterranean Press, and more. So some of these goodies are available to US donors only, like Rae's. Some are available to donors worldwide, including the final Subterranean Press book that we have. It's called Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher, whose work also crosses over into horror. And it's a beautiful book with embossed illustrations and made for handmade paper. Part of it is from handmade paper. Do go check it out on our fundraising page. I'm going to put a slide up in case anyone's missing this in the chat box. So, all right. So you can donate to get your goodies, including Rae's 2 bundles via our fundraising page on Ready Up. Go to tinyurl.com/R4P Rally Up IWD 2026. That's tinyurl.com/R4P Rally Up IWD 2026. This is case sensitive. Please make sure to be careful when you type it in. And you can find out more about the Read for Pixels campaign, which has entered its 12th year. We've been running this for 12 years now. At bit.ly/read4pixels, also case sensitive. And also we have a book available from Black Spot Books. It's a poetry collection, and it's called Under Her Eye. It features poetry from, I think, 112 female and non-binary authors writing with their original work about domestic violence and other types of violence against women. For more information, please visit vesuvianmedia.com/under-her-I. You can also get the book from any major bookseller worldwide. Just order it. The proceeds go to us, and the great thing about having this book in hand is you can use it to break the ice with talking about violence against women with your family, with your friends, with your community. Go check it out. And finally, we have a PSA. If you want to learn more about violence against women and how to help victims worldwide, do visit us at www.thepixelproject.net. We have a ton of primers, checklists, lots of resources that you can use to learn about violence against women and getting help. And if you need help, if you're watching this and you or anyone else you think needs help immediately, for domestic violence and sexual assault helplines and resources in every UN recognized country and territory in the world, please visit the nomoredirectory.org. And this directory is a huge database, searchable database. Just type in your country and it will pull up a list of helplines, hotlines, shelters, and all in your country. It also includes helplines and hotlines and shelters for LGBTQIA people, so everyone's covered. And it is run by the by the NOMO Foundation and UN Women and the World Bank. So it is up to date, and it is a very good resource for everybody. So I'm going to take this off the screen. Before we leave, Rae, I think, has some announcements. You talked about one of your books that's coming out in the summer, but I think you have something else coming out, right?
I do, yes. So my short story collection, Horror Short Stories, I Do Not Apologize for My Position on Men, comes out July 21st from Shortwave Publishing. And then later this fall, my commercial debut called Happily Ever After the Murders comes out from Legacy Lit, which is an imprint of Hachette. Very, very excited about that. That's my first Big Five publishing release. So super exciting. And that one is sort of the Golden Girls meets Bonnie and Clyde. Two elderly women go on the run after they're about to be discovered for a double homicide they committed 40 years earlier. So it's a fun sort of on the run, on the road adventure book with two sour older women, one of which is inspired by my late grandmother.
Would you say they're like the elderly version of Thelma and Louise?
Yes, I would. I think that's a very apt comparison. So if you're into Thelma and Louise, or like Bonnie and Clyde, but make it sapphic and older adult, check out Happily Ever After the Murders.
This is gonna be great. I'm gonna go. Can we bookmark the page already on Booksellers?
I don't think it's ready yet, but hopefully very soon it'll be like on the Goodreads and up for pre-order and all the things. But if you want to keep an eye on it, feel free to follow me. I'll definitely post about it on Instagram. My handle is @_Rae_Wilde. You'll you'll find me in. I'll give you all the details.
Everybody follow Rae so that we can all get our hands on this book, because it's gonna be a great ride reading it.
Thank you. I think so.
Yeah. So we are going to wrap up now. Everybody, thank you so much for being with us today, Rae. Thank you so much, everybody, for being with us and asking your questions and interacting with us. It's been a great live stream. So we will see y'all. This is actually the final show of this month. And we will be having our fall edition of Read for Pixels in September. And for September, we have a good mix of authors coming up, and we include men this time and also some non-binary authors. So check it out, everybody. Have a good day or good night wherever you are in the world.